So daily maintenance on the blade. It needs cleaning and it needs oiling. And in this day and age, obviously it will need disinfecting as well. So your blade consists of 4 main parts, 5 arguably. You've got the large piece on the bottom, which we call the comb. You've got the bit that slides backwards and forwards, which is the cutter blade. You have your tension spring, a socket, and you also have a plastic strip on there which sits into the cutter blade groove. Now, whilst we're here, we might as well talk about tension on blades. That spring is there to press the cutter blade down onto the comb. Depending on the size of the blade, the age of the blade, and the actual general condition of it, that should be between 2 and 3 pounds pressure. Wide blades take a little bit more pressure. Wide blades you have to be a little bit more exact with, but overall it's the tension on that spring and the correct tension on the spring that causes the cutter to work. Obviously if there's too little tension on there, as you're going through the coat you'll find the hair will start to force the cutter up, so it's not cutting properly. If there's too much tension on it, it's pressing in too far, and that will cause additional heat on the blade and greater wear. So your sharpener, if he knows his stuff, will have set your tension correctly. From there, you shouldn't need, as long as that blade is working, you shouldn't need to touch it. Certainly don't go undoing or messing about with the screws on it, because if you do and you slacken it off, it can cause the blade to fall apart or for the cutter blade to shift. I see it an awful lot on various groups of people talking about adjusting the tension on the blades, and on different people will say, oh, just loosen the screws on the front. Please, 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 please don't. It's dangerous. If that blade comes apart while it's doing 2,000 revolutions a minute across the back of a dog and that cutter blade slips, you can cut a dog's skin open. So please, leave the screws as they are. Daily maintenance. Clean it. And what we'd say in the first place is take your trusty toothbrush or your blaster and clean all the hair out. They're actually remarkably clean. Clean all the hair out from between the teeth, both sides, and you get the pet dander, the skin dander that will cause cake up within the teeth. Scrub all that out. If you're using blade wash and disinfectant, if it's a spray, give it a spray now. If you're using it and then you're dipping it, you can either soak it or you can attach it to the clippers and put that into a small tray and run it in the blade wash that way, and then dry it off. If you need to get the blaster, again, blast it. It's a great way of drying them off and getting rid of the hair. So if you're sliding your blade, aha, found some hair. If you slide your blade halfway over, and take your hair out from there, and push it back, and push it the other way, and lo and behold, more hair there. So get rid of all that. You've cleaned it. Your next step is oiling, and I can't stress how important it is to oil the blades. I see groomers every day who just not quite refuse to oil the blades, but don't think it's a good idea because it gets onto the coat or it makes the hands sticky. The simple fact is, if you want your blades to work properly, you have to oil them. The two pieces of metal that are rubbing together and creating friction. If you're not oiling them, they will heat up. You'll end up having to change them more often. The blades will wear and need sharpening more often. And it's such a simple thing to do. What the mistake I think a lot of people make is they take some of the big oil bottles and they're pouring it on there, and eventually, obviously, it gets everywhere and it's running off the blade and it gets onto the dog's coat and it gets all over your hands. The best thing to do is use a dropper bottle. So you take a little dropper bottle of your oil, and what you're needing to do is to put a drop on there, a drop on there, and a drop there. And then if you see you have a rail at the back, you put a drop there and one there. So that's 5 drops of oil. Now either put that onto your clippers and buzz it up for a couple of seconds, or just move it backwards and forwards with your fingers and just work it in, and you'll find it actually feels easier as the oil's working its way in. If it's on a clipper, as you drop the oil onto it, you'll hear the speed of the blade pick up, and that shows that the oil's working. Use an extremely good quality oil, you'll have to oil less often, and in that way you're not having to take up your time doing it, but your blades will work properly. Exactly the same with the wide blade. If you look at the wide blades, they're working exactly the same way, they're just a slightly different design. Maintenance on them, it needs a little bit more tension on there, but your sharpener should be aware of that. Oiling them, exactly the same again. A drop on there, drop on there, drop on there. One on your back rails. And just move that backwards and forwards. You will find, if you don't do this wide blades, because of the style of them, because of the design of them, if you don't oil them, it will exert a lot more pressure and wear onto the blade drive on your clippers. So it's even more important to oil wide blades than it is standard ones. But once it's done, the manufacturers will tell you to oil them after every single dog. And the simple fact is, life's too short. You might find if it's a very heavy coat, you might have to oil it in between. So actually while you're doing the dog, you might take one blade, oil it, let it cool down, take another blade, put it on, and come back to the other one. As you feel the blade starting to get hot, it's worth putting a couple of drops of oil on it. Ultimately, your blade will last longer, your blade will run cooler, and you'll sharpen it less. And that ultimately is, it's what it's about. It's about making the blade work properly for you without costing you a fortune.